A little girl with a metal leg. A wedding day. A cruel stepmother forcing her to sing in front of hundreds of guests, not as intentional humiliation. And then, out of nowhere, a silver-haired millionaire storms through the crowd, screaming words that silence the entire reception hall. What he reveals next will shatter everything you think you know about wealth, family, and the dark secrets people hide behind perfect smiles. This is the story of Emma Morgan, a 10-year-old girl who lost her father under mysterious circumstances, only to be trapped in the gilded cage of her stepmother's mansion. On what should have been the happiest day in her stepmother's life, Emma's voice would become the weapon that exposes a conspiracy, stretching back to her father's death. Before we dive into this emotional journey, I want you to imagine, what would you do if someone you loved was taken from you, and the person responsible smiled at their own wedding while you watched? Because Emma didn't just watch, she sang. And that song changed everything. Stay with me until the very end, because justice has never sounded sweeter. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. It was a spring morning when sunlight filtered through the crystal windows of the Morgan estate, casting a soft honey-colored glow across the hardwood floors. The property sat perched on a hillside in Napa Valley, nestled between meticulously maintained gardens of white roses. Everything looked so perfect that it was hard to believe that just 1 year ago, this place had been home to a man who died tragically in what everyone called an accident. Richard Morgan. In the downstairs living room, Evelyn Hartwell sat on a white leather sofa, flipping through the guest list with one hand while marking names with a red pen in the other. The light caught her blonde hair, slightly wavy and perfectly styled, reflecting off the wine glass resting on the marble table. Her face was impassive, but her eyes were hard and cold. Marcus Hayes, her son from a previous marriage, sat in the corner of the room. The 15-year-old boy, tall and lanky, carefully placed labels on wedding invitation envelopes. He worked with precision, measuring each placement as if he feared that any small mistake might make the atmosphere in the room even more tense. Evelyn looked up, glancing over her shoulder. "Marcus, you put that label crooked. My invitations can't arrive to guests with such careless presentation." Marcus flinched, quickly straightening it. His voice was barely a whisper. "Sorry, Mom. I wasn't paying attention." Not paying attention is the habit of someone who'll never succeed. "Do you understand?" She spoke softly, but her words were enough to make Marcus's back go rigid. Upstairs, 10-year-old Emma Morgan's small bedroom was strangely quiet. The girl was thin, her metal prosthetic leg gleaming faintly beneath her dress. She limped to the window, looking down at the garden where several employees were stringing garland lights and assembling the floral arch under the sun. Everything sparkled and vibrated with excitement. She stared silently at the picture frame on the wooden shelf, a photo of her dad with a gentle smile. Next to it sat an old, scratched music box. Emma opened the lid, and the melody that used to be her mother's nighttime lullaby before she passed away drifted out. The sound squeezed her chest tight. Then she remembered her father sitting beside her bed, stroking her hair and saying, "If anyone ever comes looking for you, his name is Victor Sterling. Trust him. He's my best friend." That phrase echoed in her mind, a thin thread connecting the past and the present. The door burst open, letting light flood in. Evelyn entered, her heels clicking lightly against the wooden floor. She scanned the room, then stopped at the girl. "Still sitting here?" Her voice was cold but smooth, as if each word was meticulously calculated. "Come downstairs and get ready. Today you'll help me during the pre-wedding party." Emma nodded slightly. "Yes, stepmother." Evelyn closed the door. A gentle breeze moved the curtains, carrying the scent of roses from the garden below. The girl slowly put away the music box, her fingers trembling as she closed the lid. Then she limped out of the room. Downstairs, the air was loud and dense with the scent of expensive perfume. Charles Ashford, Evelyn's fiancé, had just arrived. He was a man in his 50s, tall with a kind face and eyes that always seemed to apologize for his own delays. He'd lost his wife to a serious illness and believed Evelyn was his chance to start over. Evelyn approached him with an elegant, practiced smile. "You're right on time. They're setting up the wedding venue. I want to make sure everything is absolutely flawless." Charles took her hand and smiled. "But you're always flawless, Evelyn. And this house too, I've never seen such a bright place." Evelyn responded with a look that contained something hard to decipher. Not exactly love. Not gratitude. It was merely the reaction of someone too accustomed to compliments. In a far corner, Miss Dorothy, the housekeeper, watched silently. She'd served the Morgan family since Richard was alive. Her gray hair was neatly pulled back, and the tea tray in her hands trembled slightly. She looked at Evelyn, then saw Emma struggling to keep her balance while carrying a tray of pastries to the garden. Dorothy set down the tea tray and quietly approached, whispering, "Let me help you, child." Emma shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I can do it. If stepmother sees you helping me, she'd get upset." Dorothy froze, then managed only a sad smile. "Then I'll stay close in case you stumble." Evelyn, mid-conversation with Charles, caught the glance. She called out sharply, "Dorothy, take the tea tray to the guests. Don't just stand there gossiping." Her voice made everyone in the room pause. Dorothy bowed her head. "My apologies, ma'am." When Charles turned around, Evelyn leaned in, speaking loud enough for Dorothy to hear. "If you keep showing sympathy for that girl, I'll have to let you go." Dorothy bowed deeply, her hands clutching the white cloth until it wrinkled. The entire afternoon passed in a blur of noise. The sound of workers assembling the arch, the clinking of crystal, Evelyn's curt directions. It all blended into a shrill symphony. When the sunlight faded, Emma was finally allowed to return to her room. Her prosthetic legs made each step heavy, but she was used to it. She felt no pain, only exhaustion. At her desk, a pencil lay next to her journal. She opened a new page and wrote a few lines in small, slanted handwriting. "Tomorrow stepmother gets married. I don't know if Daddy can see me. I wish he was still here. But beneath the text, she sketched a man with kind eyes and a soft smile with gray hair, the image in her memory. Every time her father spoke of Uncle Victor. Outside, the night wind slipped through the window. A wedding invitation placed on the desk fluttered gently to the floor. Emma bent down to pick it up, seeing the name printed in bold, Mr. Victor Sterling. Her heart gave a small leap. She clutched the card tightly, looking out toward the rose garden where Evelyn, under the yellow garland lights, stood in the center of the lawn, radiant as she raised a glass with Charles. Her smile was so bright that anyone who saw it would think she was the picture of a happy woman. The busy preparations gradually faded, bringing the wedding day closer. Everything was ready for the grand morning. Underscore dawn flooded the garden of the Morgan estate, covering everything in brilliant silvery light. The sound of the wind mixed with the tuning of a violin. Dozens of service employees rushed across the lawn, their voices blending into a frantic rhythm. Outside the gate, reporters and guests pushed for space, camera flashes flickering like shooting stars in the morning mist. White roses covered the entire main aisle. Chairs were neatly aligned, tablecloths immaculate, and clear crystal glasses reflected the sunlight. In the center of the garden stood an elaborately constructed floral arch, the place where Evelyn Hartwell would walk in her custom-made Parisian wedding gown. The bride appeared slowly. Her steps were graceful but calculated, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet, proud composure. Beside her, Charles Ashford, her fiancé, smiled widely, shaking hands with guests. He wore a cream-colored tuxedo, his face kind and benevolent, his eyes holding the peace he'd sought all his life after losing his first wife. He believed Evelyn was a good woman, capable of love and healing. Little did he know that today, the very affection he trusted would be shattered right before his eyes. Behind the stage area, Emma cringed. Her bright sapphire blue dress stood out like a splash of color against the pure white canvas of the ceremony. Evelyn had claimed red symbolized good luck, but everyone understood that in a sea of white, it only made the girl look isolated, different. and easier to notice. Miss Dorothy, the housekeeper, bent down to adjust the ribbon at the back of the girl's dress. Don't get flustered, sweetheart. If you run out of breath, just look up at the sky, okay? Emma nodded slightly, her small hand clutching the music box hidden in her dress pocket. She looked toward the stone path where her father used to walk her every morning. A year later, that path was covered in white flowers, his shadow gone. The introductory music began. The officiant spoke, inviting the bride and groom forward. Hundreds of eyes turned toward Evelyn and Charles. She took his hand, walking slowly, her long white silk dress sweeping the damp grass. Applause rose, interspersed with the sound of cameras. Standing in the center of the garden, Evelyn tilted her face toward the sun. For a moment, the wind lifted her thin veil, wrapping around her face. The image made everyone hold their breath, a perfect picture. A woman seemingly created to walk under the light. Only Emma, standing behind the stage, saw more clearly than anyone. Evelyn's hands were gripping the white bouquet lightly, so tightly that the petals were crushed. When the vows concluded, the sound of conversation filled the garden. Evelyn took the microphone and stepped onto the platform. Her voice was soft. Before we begin the reception, I'd like to give my husband and all of you a gift. A truly special gift. The guests fell silent. Some aimed their cameras at her, ready to capture the memorable moment. Evelyn turned, her eyes scanning the crowd. Then stopping at the corner of the stage where Emma stood. Emma. Come here, my dear. Come. Dorothy subtly shook her head, whispering, You don't have to go if you don't want to. But before the girl could respond, a server gently pushed her forward. The sapphire blue dress fluttered in the breeze. All the chatter gradually ceased. She's Emma. Evelyn smiled at the guests. This little one carries the strong spirit of her father, Richard Morgan. Today, she sang a song for us. The guests murmured. A woman in a black dress leaned in and whispered, Poor thing. She probably just wants the girl to provide entertainment. Another man laughed lightly. A charity performance, perhaps. Soft laughter echoed. Emma held the microphone, her hand shaking. Her gaze drifted to the sky where white clouds shifted. Emma thought of her dad, the one who used to sit by her bedside, smiling as he said, When you sing, your mama listens. Emma took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to sing. The sound was initially small and fragile, nearly breaking. But after a few notes, the familiar melody of Lullaby for the Stars spread across the garden. The young voice, clear and trembling, gradually pulled everyone away from their initial mockery. When the stars fall asleep, you'll watch over your dreams. Each note touched the open air. Light as mist but deeply resonant. The wind blew, scattering rose petals from the arch. Dorothy stood nearby, her eyes moistening. Charles bowed his head in silence, his lips moving with the lyrics as if hearing the voice of a father who was no longer there. Within the song, Evelyn maintained her smile, but her eyelid began to twitch. She turned to the officiant, nodding slightly, a signal to conclude. But the officiant hesitated, unwilling to interrupt the moment. Emma continued singing. Her voice grew clearer and more genuine with each note. She no longer saw the crowd. She no longer heard the whispers. There was only her and the sky, where her father was watching. The song reached its climax. The final line felt like a prayer. And when you're gone, I'll keep singing for you. When the singing stopped, the garden fell silent. No one applauded. No one spoke. Then Evelyn stepped forward, her smile fixed as if everything had gone according to plan. That's enough, dear. Thank you for the lovely performance. She reached out and snatched the microphone away. Emma was pulled forward with force, losing her balance and falling onto the grass. The sapphire blue dress stained against the mud, leaving a dark, dirty smudge. Be careful, Evelyn said softly, her voice still honeyed. You've dirtied the floor. Silent laughter rose again. Some people pretended to cough to cover their discomfort. Then Charles moved a step forward, but Evelyn gently stopped his arm, whispering, Don't worry, darling. Children are clumsy sometimes. Dorothy rushed to help Emma up, But the girl just kept her head down, biting her lip hard. Her eyes were filled with tears. Her hand still clutching the music box in her dress pocket, Evelyn raised her wine glass, her voice crystal clear. "Thank you all for sharing this important day with me. Now please raise your glasses for a toast." She turned her back to the audience, her smile more radiant than ever. But in the back row, a man suddenly stood up. His chair hit the floor. The sound echoed, making everyone turn around. He wore a navy blue suit, his silver hair reflecting the sunlight, his eyes burning sharp as steel blades. Victor Sterling walked toward the stage, his steps quick and decisive. Dorothy stepped back, alarmed. Emma looked up, her eyes wide. His voice boomed through the deadly silence, echoing from the front rows to the back of the garden. "Stop right there." The wind picked up, scattering a few more white petals. Evelyn turned around. The wine glass in her hand trembled slightly, and everyone held their breath as the man marched directly to the platform. His gaze settling on Emma, the girl trembling in the sunbeam, mud staining her sapphire blue dress. Her eyes full of dread. Victor's shout sliced through the air like lightning. The music, the chatter, the laughter, everything went silent. Guests holding their glasses stopped mid-toast, their eyes fixed on the silver-haired man in the navy blue suit charging directly toward the stage area. Emma was still sitting on the grass, her small hands clutching the edge of her dress. Mud stained the dark red fabric. Her eyes were wide, tears mixing with sweat as they fell. Victor knelt down, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart. Stand up." His hand was warm and firm. Emma looked up at his face, a stranger's face, but in his eyes she saw something familiar. Perhaps it was the feeling of safety she'd lost so long ago. Evelyn remained on the platform, her lips pressed tightly. She forced a smile, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Sterling, please keep calm. This is merely a misunderstanding." Victor helped Emma to her feet, gently brushing the mud from her dress. He raised his head, his gaze so cold that several guests stepped back. "A misunderstanding?" His voice was solid as rock. "You call this despicable act a misunderstanding?" The air in the garden seemed to freeze. Charles stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "Evelyn, what is all this about? Why the girl—" "My love," Evelyn interrupted quickly, laughing softly. "I simply wanted the guests to see her resilience. Richard always said she had a strong spirit, so I thought, this isn't about resilience." Victor cut in, each word heavy. "It's intentional humiliation." Charles froze. He'd never heard anyone speak to Evelyn in that tone. Victor looked at him directly. "Do you even know who this girl is, Mr. Ashford?" Charles frowned slightly. "Evelyn said she was her niece." "Incorrect," Victor stated, his eyes never leaving the girl at his side. "This child is the daughter of Richard Morgan, a man I considered my own brother." The declaration caused a stir among the crowd. Whispers spread like wildfire. Evelyn momentarily paled, then recovered her composure with terrifying speed. She offered a dismissive smile. "Mr. Sterling, you must be mistaken. Richard had many relatives. You must be thinking of another girl." Another voice spoke from the corner of the garden, weak but resolute. "No, ma'am. He speaks the truth." Everyone turned. Miss Dorothy, the elderly housekeeper, stood among the crowd, still clutching a white cloth. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "I was with Mr. Richard the day he passed. He told me that if anything happened, I had to watch over the girl." Evelyn startled, her eyes flashing. "Dorothy, what nonsense are you saying?" "I'm only speaking the truth," Dorothy replied, her voice trembling but firm. "You were the one who prevented me from seeing Emma all this time." The entire garden fell into absolute silence. Some reporters began raising their cameras. Charles looked at Evelyn. For the first time, he saw genuine fear in the eyes of the woman he thought he understood. "Evelyn," he said softly, his voice heavy. "Is there something you haven't told me?" She didn't respond. She only stared at Victor, her lips pressed so tightly they were almost purple. Victor bent down and took Emma in his arms. The girl let out a small sob, burying her face in his shoulder. "I promised your father I'd protect you," he said quietly, yet his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "And I keep my word." Some guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to applaud or remain silent. A heavy atmosphere settled over the garden of white roses. Evelyn stood there, her hands gripping the bridal bouquet tightly. The white petals were crushed between her fingers. Stained a pale green dot, she watched Victor walk through the crowd, holding the girl firmly in his arms. She knew things were no longer simple. Charles approached, his voice tense. "Evelyn... Is it true? Is she Richard's biological daughter?" She didn't respond. She only gave him a quick glance before turning away. Her smile was forced. Her eyes darkened. Charles released her waist, stepping back like someone who just realized he'd trusted the wrong person. In the distance, reporters began taking photos non-stop. Flashes burst one after another. Evelyn turned her back. The usual proud expression had vanished from her face. She swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure, but her eyes failed to hide the latent fury. Victor walked directly toward the gate without looking back. The wind whipped his coat, carrying a few scattered white rose petals. Emma rested comfortably in his embrace, her face pressed against his shoulder, her small hands still clutching the music box, the only thing she took with her. Dorothy watched them, her eyes reddened. She knew that from this moment on, everything would change. When Victor and Emma disappeared behind the trees, Evelyn remained motionless like a statue. A drop of wine fell from the glass in her hand onto the grass. Spreading like a bloodstain, Evelyn took a deep breath, her eyes slowly moving through the crowd. Then stopping on one person. Marcus stood at the end of the rows of seats, his gaze full of panic, his hands clenched. Evelyn tilted her head, her gaze sharp as a blade, giving a silent command. "Follow them." Marcus swallowed hard, his heart pounding wildly. He didn't fully understand what was happening, only that the man who just appeared seemed to be the piece of the past his mother always wanted to bury. The guests began to leave, the sound of their shoes crunching on gravel. They spoke in low voices, their tones mixed with curiosity and apprehension. Some looked at Evelyn cautiously. Others avoided her gaze as if fearing being dragged into the mess. Evelyn still stood in the disturbed garden, holding the ruined bouquet. She pressed her lips together, took a deep breath, and then forced a calculating smile. Outside, the wind began to pick up, making the white veil behind her wave violently. In the distance, Marcus looked in the direction Victor had gone, his feet taking a tentative step, then stopping. In his ear, Evelyn's voice still echoed cold and clear. "Don't make me remind you, Marcus." Marcus closed his eyes, clenching his fists. The wind threw his hair back. When he opened his eyes, something had changed in his gaze: conflict, fear, and a small spark of something he couldn't yet name. Marcus began to walk. He slipped through the crowd, silently leaving the garden, heading toward the road where Victor and Emma had vanished. The afternoon sun stretched his shadow along the stone path, as if the shadow itself was guiding him toward where truth waited. Behind him, Evelyn still stood, her eyes following her son. Her face was cold, devoid of emotion. Only her hands still gripping the crushed white bouquet tightly dripped the last drops of red wine. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. Closing parenthesis. Victor held Emma and quickly left the grounds, ignoring the camera lenses that pursued them. His coat gently shielded the girl like a wall against the world. A black car was parked waiting at the gate. He opened the door, placed her gently inside, and closed the door softly. "It's okay. You're safe now," he whispered, his voice slightly trembling with repressed emotion. Emma didn't respond. She only clutched the music box tightly in her hand. Her disheveled hair covered half her mud-stained face, her reddened eyes staring out the window where the sky was turning gray. The car pulled away from the Morgan estate, driving down tree-lined roads. Outside, the city seemed to sink into afternoon, streetlights reflecting in the car window dot in the rearview mirror. Victor occasionally glanced at the girl, but each time he looked, his heart tightened. That face, those eyes, they were exactly like Richard's. About an hour later, the car stopped in front of an old house in the western suburbs. It was an ancient stone structure, its walls covered in ivy, with dark wooden doors sitting silently in a small forest. It wasn't flashy, but it felt warm and authentic. Grace, Victor's longtime housekeeper, opened the door to greet them. She paused when she saw Emma in his arms. Her eyes softened as if touching something deep within her. Oh my God, those eyes! Exactly like her father's. Without needing to ask, Grace fetched a warm cloth and gently wiped the mud from the girl's face without saying a word. Emma sat still, feeling the hand that was both strange and familiar, like a lost memory. Victor only nodded slightly at Grace before heading to his study. He turned on the light and walked to the safe in the corner. His movements were slow and careful. When the safe door opened, inside lay an old envelope. The yellowed paper bore handwritten words that made him pause. Son, if I'm no longer here, please take care of my little one. Richard. Victor sat down, gently stroking the handwriting. He closed his eyes, and Richard's laughter seemed to echo in his ear. He owed his friend one thing his entire life, and now that debt had become a promise he had to fulfill to the end. Night fell. Emma fell asleep on the sofa, still clutching the music box tightly. The faint sound of music played softly in the dark room, thin as a breath. Victor stood watching her for a long time, then pulled out his phone and dialed a number. His voice was hoarse but decisive. Mrs. Brooks, I need to see you. It's about Richard Morgan. The next morning, there was a knock at the door exactly at 8 o'clock. A woman in her late 30s entered, tall, hair neatly pulled back, eyes sharp but warm. Elizabeth Brooks, attorney, she said, placing a document bag on the table. I assume this isn't just a social visit. Victor indicated for her to sit, then glanced toward the stairs where Emma was peeking out. This is the little one, he said quietly. Elizabeth turned. When her eyes met Emma's, a slight smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. Hello, dear. I met you before when you were very small. Your father used to bring you to my office. Emma tilted her head slightly, her eyes mixing curiosity with reserve. Hello. Then Elizabeth turned to Victor, opening her file. I kept some copies from Morgan Enterprises before I left. But here's the thing. She paused, looking at him. Richard's passing last year never seemed right to me. Victor frowned. What do you mean? A week before he died, an important stock transfer document was signed. The handwriting doesn't seem completely identical, Elizabeth replied. And the only person who could have requested that at the time was Evelyn. The tension in the room thickened. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Victor remained silent. The vague doubts he'd tried to dismiss were now becoming clear. Are you certain? He asked. I'm not saying Evelyn silenced him, but something was covered up. Many of Richard's documents were altered right before he died. And the strangest thing is, she looked toward Emma. His original will was never found. Emma sat quietly, listening to every word without fully understanding. She only heard her father's name, the word died, and a vague feeling of hope mixed with fear swelling in her heart. Victor crossed his arms, thinking for a long time, then spoke. For now, focus on Emma's custody. I don't want Evelyn to have another opportunity to get near the girl. After that, we'll recover all the original documents, including the ones they tried to hide. Elizabeth nodded. I'll get to work immediately. But understand Evelyn has influence, money, and connections in the legal world. We'll have to be very cautious. You handle your part, Victor responded. I'll handle the rest. Their eyes met. A slight nod. A tacit trust, underscore at the same time. At the Morgan estate, Evelyn sat alone in the living room. The large screen in front of her replayed footage of the wedding ceremony. The clip of Victor holding Emma and walking away amid the commotion. The image was rebroadcast repeatedly by the press, with headlines splashed in red. The Morgan secret. Bride. Accused of humiliating late husband's daughter on wedding day, Evelyn placed her wine glass on the table. Her hand gripped so tightly it turned white. A glass fragment broke, tinkling on the floor. Her eyes were cold as ice, like frozen water meeting fire. If you won a battle, Victor, she murmured, her slight smile stretching, I'll show you who the real winner is. Outside the door, Marcus was pressed against the wall. He heard every word clearly. His heart was heavy. He wanted to believe his mother. But the image of Emma being snubbed in front of the crowd never left his mind. The next morning. In the city office, Elizabeth sat in front of her computer, finalizing the first legal document, temporary petition to establish legal guardianship of the minor, Emma Morgan, to Mr. Victor Sterling. She took a deep breath and pressed send. The file disappeared from the screen, but she knew the battle had begun. Night. Rain fell heavily in the suburbs. The light from Victor's old house cast a small warm glow in the darkness. There was a knock at the door, slow, deliberate, then silenced. Victor opened the door. On the porch stood a young man, drenched, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Rainwater ran down his hair and tense face. Marcus swallowed hard, his voice tight with cold and fear. I have something to tell you. About the girl's father's death. The phrase was like lightning in the rainy night. Victor froze for a second, then opened the door wide. The light from inside spilled out, enveloping the boy. Thunder roared through the dark gray sky. Thunder rumbled through the dark gray sky. Rain lashed against the windows, pouring down the old roof tiles like a violent nocturnal symphony. Outside the ivy-covered iron gate, two figures in black raincoats silently passed by the trees, stepping as softly as phantoms. A flash of lightning illuminated the traces of water running down the stun device in one man's hand. In the kitchen, Grace was pouring tea. The scent of peppermint tea filled the air, mixing with the sound of rain. She just placed the teapot on the tray when she heard a very slight click in the garden, the sound of the iron gate closing. She lifted her head, listening carefully. But only the rain answered. Must be the wind, she reassured herself, then walked toward the window. But just as she did, the hallway light behind her suddenly went out. The kitchen plunged into dense darkness. Upstairs, Emma woke with a start. The rain still pounded the roof, but now there was another sound, heavy, slow footsteps in the hallway. She held her breath, listening. 1 heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. 3 heartbeats. Then silence. She clutched the music box tightly. Though cracked, it was the only thing that made her feel her father was near. The bedroom door trembled slightly. A shadow had stopped outside. A hand rested on the doorknob, turning it gently. The door opened a fraction. But just then, a loud crash erupted. Marcus, who'd fallen asleep in the living room, rushed upstairs, throwing a brass doorstop directly at the intruder's head. The sound of metal hitting flesh was sharp and dry. Emma, run! Marcus shouted. The man staggered back, hitting the wall but didn't fall. At the same moment, another shadow appeared from behind, tackling Marcus. The two struggled on the floor, the sounds of impact echoing in the dark hallway. Marcus gasped, retreating to the corner of the room. Elizabeth and Victor rushed out. Victor pushed Marcus aside, delivering a blunt blow to the second attacker. The hit was so powerful that the sound of bone breaking was clearly audible. The man collapsed, but the remaining intruder quickly slid through the window, jumping onto the awning and disappearing under the rain. Marcus, are you okay? Victor knelt down. Marcus gasped for breath. Blood dripped from his forehead. He nodded, trying to speak through labored breaths. He wanted to take Emma. Elizabeth turned on the light switch. The white light revealed a chaotic scene: torn curtains, an overturned dresser, rainwater seeping through the window. On the floor, the subdued attacker lay face down, his hands tied with an electrical cord. Victor turned him over. The light shone on a tattoo on his neck, a triangular symbol enclosed within the letter E. Elizabeth pulled out her phone, quickly taking a photo before police arrived. "I recognize this symbol," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is a signature of a private security firm Evelyn used to contract when she was on the board of Morgan Enterprises." Victor remained silent. He looked at the unconscious man, then examined the house-wet wooden floors, broken glass. He understood. Evelyn had officially declared war. When the police arrived, Victor kept his statement brief. 2 unauthorized individuals. 1 escaped. "Keep this confidential until I give the order." He knew if this news got out, Evelyn would manipulate the story to her advantage. After the police left, Emma sat in Grace's lap, still trembling. Elizabeth applied a bandage to Marcus, her eyes softening as she watched him try to hide his fear. "You're brave," she said quietly. Nearby. Victor looked at the puddle on the floor where Emma's music box now lay, shattered small metal fragments glinting under the light. Emma looked at it, her lips trembling. It doesn't sing anymore." Victor approached, picking up the pieces one by one and placing them in his hand. "It's okay. We'll fix it. Just like we're going to fix everything they've ruined." Dawn was coming slowly, a fine mist covering the garden. Elizabeth returned to the study, spreading all the recovered articles on the table. In the attacker's pocket, she found a small wet object, a silver access card with the Morgan Enterprises logo. She dried it, squinting. The name on the card, Eric Martin. Victor looked up. Evelyn's most trusted assistant. The one who managed Ritz's trust account. Elizabeth nodded, her voice lowering. "Which means Evelyn still has someone inside the board. She could erase any trace of the real Will at any moment." The atmosphere in the room was dense. Victor walked to the window, looking at the rain-soaked garden. Pale light broke through the trees, illuminating his face. "We can't just sit and wait. If Evelyn wants to launch an offensive, we'll make her expose herself." Elizabeth looked at him. "What's your plan of action?" "We'll hold a memorial for Richard." "Yes, publicly. We'll invite the press, old friends, and Evelyn herself. If she thinks we're only talking about the past, she'll lower her guard. And right there, we'll start revealing the truth." Elizabeth nodded slowly, understanding. "Then I'll handle the legal and media side." That night, the house returned to quiet. Emma sat alone at the wooden table, the music box fragments piled in front of her. She tried to fit each piece back together, her hands trembling but her eyes bright. When a slightly distorted melody played, she smiled slightly, a small but genuine smile. Elizabeth approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. Tomorrow, we'll make them hear your true song." Emma looked up, her eyes shining with a belief she hadn't felt in a long time. Outside the window, the last rain faded, leaving only the silver moon shining over the garden that had just endured. A stormy night. Underscore in a high-rise office downtown. Evelyn stood in front of a large glass window. Below her, car lights ran like glowing rivers. She crossed her arms, looking down in silence. "Everyone wants a confrontation." Her voice was soft but sharp as a knife blade. The man standing behind her, Eric Martin, remained silent. The small bandage on his neck was a reminder of the previous night's clash. Evelyn turned around, her gaze icy. "Fine. Prepare that memorial service." "And my way." Outside, the sky was just beginning to clear. But in Evelyn's eyes, there was only one color: ash gray, cold. And ready for the next storm. A week after that rainy night, the city was consumed by a news frenzy. On every front page, the image of the limping girl in the sapphire blue dress, the victim of the humiliating wedding, was everywhere. Major newspapers published articles. Evelyn Hartwell, the false angel of the elite. Her name became the topic of discussion, everywhere from coffee shops to late-night news broadcasts. Victor said nothing, silently watching the television screen in the living room. He knew the timing was right. 3 days later, he announced an event called A Night in Remembrance of Richard Morgan, a public ceremony to honor his late friend while raising funds for an orphanage. Invitations were sent to the entire board of Morgan Enterprises. The press and media outlets. Naturally. Evelyn was on that list. Underscore on the morning of the event. Victor's house was a hive of activity. Elizabeth and Marcus sat at a long table reviewing files, a copy of the original will, signature verification results, and saved video sequences from the notary's office. Marcus was tense. Sweat beaded his forehead. Elizabeth placed her hand on the folder, her voice firm. We only have one chance. When I give the signal, you play the video. Not before. Not after. Understood? Yes, Marcus whispered. But his eyes showed fierce determination. In the corner of the room, Emma was practicing singing. She wore a simple white dress, her hair slightly pulled back. Her voice was trembling at first but gradually stabilized. The song Lullaby for the Stars rang out again, this time not amid mocking lights, but for her father. Victor stood near the door, watching the girl. You don't have to sing for anyone to accept you, he said gently. Sing for the person who believed you were the most beautiful thing he had. Emma nodded slightly, her eyes shining. Underscore that evening. The city hall blazed brightly with candlelight. The entire grand hall was covered in white flowers, and a black and white photograph of Richard was prominently placed in the center beneath the words, "Forever remembering the one who lit dreams." The atmosphere was solemn but underlined with tension. As everyone understood, this ceremony wasn't simply a memorial. Reporters jostled for space. Cameras moved everywhere. Board members whispered among themselves, their eyes constantly glancing at the empty seat in the front row reserved for Evelyn. The large doors opened. Evelyn appeared. She wore a bright crimson-red dress, subtle makeup, her expression sad enough to evoke sympathy. Reporters immediately lit up their cameras. Evelyn offered a slight smile, gracefully bowing her head to the flashes as if playing the role of a grieving widow. Beside her stood Charles Ashford, her still not officially divorced husband. He didn't look at Evelyn. His face was cold, his eyes fixed forward. On stage, Evelyn walked to the front row, gently placing a bouquet on the memorial table. Because he deserves it, she told a recording reporter quietly. Backstage, Emma trembled as she held the microphone. Elizabeth leaned in, whispering, "You've done so well, sweetheart. Just remember this is your stage, not theirs." Victor stood nearby, his eyes warm. "When you sing, your father will listen." Underscore the piano sound began. The hall was bathed in soft light. Victor stepped onto the platform, his deep voice resonating throughout the space. "Today we're here not only to remember Richard Morgan, a leader, but the most honest friend I've had. He believed kindness never goes out of style. And I believe that even though he's no longer here, that spirit lives in each of us." The hall was silent. Some people nodded. Others looked at Evelyn. Her face remained composed. Only her hands, interlaced in her lap, were slightly clenched. The music stopped. The lights moved to the center of the stage. Emma came out, her legs trembling slightly. But her eyes no longer showed fear. Everyone recognized her, the girl from the video. The murmur faded, then fell away. She held the microphone, taking a deep breath. Then her voice rang out clear, pure, and sincere. "When the stars fall asleep, I'll watch over your dreams." The sound carved its way through the rows, jumped over the candles, and touched Richard's photograph. The entire hall held its breath. Some people bowed their heads. Charles had tears in his eyes, and Evelyn quickly turned away, her lips pressed tightly. Emma finished the song. The applause was thunderous and long. She bowed. A tear rolled down her cheek, but this time it was from pride. Victor stepped forward and hugged the girl. "You did it!" Elizabeth signaled Marcus from the control table. He swallowed hard. His hand trembled slightly, but he pressed the button. The large screen behind Richard's photograph suddenly lit up. A headline appeared. "Unreleased, a document. The original will of Richard Morgana." Collective gasp rose throughout the hall. On the screen, the image of the original document was clearly visible, along with the verified signature, Richard Morgan, August 12th. Last year. Below it was the note, "All shares of Morgan Enterprises will belong to my daughter Emma Morgan upon reaching age 18. Beneath that, the signature comparison, the authentic and the manipulated overlapped like two opposing daggers. The chatter exploded. Reporters fired up their cameras. Lenses moved around the room. Evelyn's face drained of color. She jumped up, her voice tense but trying to maintain composure. "This is fabricated," she said. "This document is a forgery. I'll challenge this." The water glass on the table was knocked over by her elbow, crashing to the floor. Water splattered everywhere. Camera lights reflected on her face where her makeup began to run. Charles looked at her. His voice low but loud enough for a nearby microphone to catch. "They know everything now." "Evelyn? Everything?" The entire hall erupted in chaos. Reporters rushed forward, taking photos and shouting questions. Victor hugged Emma. Victor hugged Emma, pulling the girl from the stage through a storm of flashes. Elizabeth and Marcus quickly gathered the files. Avoiding the crowd swirling around Evelyn, she stood there in the center of attention. Alone and furious but still trying to maintain a distorted smile. "You think you can finish me off with a few pieces of paper?" she muttered, staring directly at the empty stage. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." Outside, the wind blew through the row of candles, making the flames flicker wildly. Victor looked back at the building, lights flickering through the windows. He knew this was only the beginning, because someone like Evelyn, when cornered, would never surrender. And in the hall, cameras were still focused on the woman in the bright crimson-red dress amid the questions, camera flashes, and the puddle of water on the floor that hadn't yet dried where the glass had fallen. Another storm was approaching quickly. Night fell over the city, like a thick black curtain. The lights of skyscrapers reflected through wet glass, casting flickering streaks of light. News from the memorial service spread. Newspapers and social media flooded with images of a stunned Evelyn amid the flashes. The most prominent headline in the Metropolitan Bulletin crossed the front page. Evelyn Hartwell. Allegations of will forgery and the massive fortune of Morgan Enterprises in a penthouse on the 35th floor of the central building. The phone on the desk lit up incessantly. Evelyn picked it up, examined the biting comments, then smashed it against the wall. The fragments scattered, reflecting her face in the distorted mirror, enraged, full of hatred. "All of them," she gritted her teeth. "They're all gloating." Eric Martin, the loyal assistant, stood a few steps away. His suit was damp from the rain, his collar wrinkled, but his eyes remained cold and alert. "You need to keep your composure, Evelyn," he said. "The board has begun re-examining the stock documents. If they find more evidence, you won't just lose your seat, you could face legal action." Evelyn turned around, her voice hard as steel. "Then we must make them believe I'm a victim too. If everyone thinks I was simply deceived, they'll switch sides." Eric looked at her, hesitating. "What about Richard? If they reinvestigate the cause of his death?" Evelyn stopped for a few seconds, then offered a slight, chilling smile. "Then we'll show them there's nothing left to investigate." She took a wine glass, drank it in one gulp. Her eyes scanned the window where the storm raged outside. Her voice dropped. "Clean all the data from the company system. If even one copy remains, I don't want to know about it." The next morning. The atmosphere at Victor's house was tense. Elizabeth placed a newspaper on the table, her voice urgent. "The news spread faster than we expected. And Evelyn just launched a counteroffensive." Victor frowned. "What did she do?" "She circulated a copy of a stock transfer document supposedly signed by Richard himself," Elizabeth said. "The content claims Evelyn is co-owner of Morgan Enterprises." Marcus looked at the copy Elizabeth printed, clenching his fists. "The signature looks exactly real." "It's a forgery," Elizabeth replied immediately. "A very sophisticated one, but still fake. The problem is, if Evelyn has someone on the board helping legitimize it, we'll lose all opportunities." Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes darkening. He knew Evelyn never fought without a clear escape route. Grace entered, carrying a tray of hot tea. She looked at Marcus, his face exhausted, eyes deeply shadowed. "You should take a break, young man," she said gently. "You haven't slept these past nights." Marcus managed a weak smile. Since his mother was attacked by the media, his friends at school avoided him. Some even threw stones at his house. He tried to seem strong, but inside he was torn apart. Emma saw this and quietly approached, handing him a cup of tea. "You don't have to say anything," the girl whispered. "My dad used to say that when someone is afraid, they usually choose silence instead of running." Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze, small but resolute. For the first time, he felt less alone. Late evening. Rain began again. Elizabeth spread files across the desk, carefully flipping through old papers. She'd just received a copy of hospital records. "Here it is," she said, her voice lowering. "Here's the medical report on Richard's death." Victor approached. "The cause: sudden cardiac arrest." "But," Elizabeth pointed to the final section. "The toxicology report is blank. No results were ever made. No one even requested a review." Grace gasped. "Which means?" Victor's voice was low. "Richard might not have died naturally." "Which means," Elizabeth concluded, "if we can prove that, the entire fake will become invalid." The air in the room chilled. Elizabeth folded the file, her eyes showing newfound hardness. "Then we start the investigation again. But to do that, we need someone inside the hospital." She looked at Victor. "We might need to involve law enforcement." Victor nodded slowly. "I'll call some old friends in the police." "But Elizabeth, keep these documents safe." Marcus had been quiet the whole time. Only after everyone left the room did he speak quietly. "I can meet with my mother. She just called. Said she wants to talk about something important." Elizabeth turned around, concerned. "It's risky, Marcus. Evelyn won't let you go easily." Victor looked at him for a moment, then said, "Go. Sometimes the truth is found exactly where you fear to face it. But remember, don't believe anything she says without proof." That night. A luxury restaurant by the river glowed with lights. Evelyn sat alone at a corner table. Her face unusually gentle, a marked contrast to her usual sharp demeanor. When Marcus entered, she offered a slight smile. "Thank you for coming. I just want to talk, not argue." Marcus sat down, his heart full of conflict. Evelyn poured him water, her voice soft. "You know, everything I did was to protect this family. Richard was too trusting, and that almost made us lose everything. I just adjusted things a little to secure the future." He looked at her without responding. Evelyn continued, speaking lightly, as if telling something sad. "Victor isn't as good as you think. He's using that little girl, Emma, to take over the company. Look here." She opened her purse, placing a white envelope in front of him. Inside were several clear photos, Victor leaning in, hugging Emma at the memorial service, with a caption, "Protector or manipulator." Evelyn sighed softly. "He knows how to influence public opinion. But when that girl grows up, the company will belong to her." "Think about it, is that what Richard really wanted?" "No," Marcus said quietly. He picked up the photos, his hands cold as ice. He knew his mother was skilled at emotional manipulation, but his heart was still in crisis. "Mom," he said quietly, "did you ever think if Dad was really harmed, who benefited most?" Evelyn stopped, but quickly recovered her smile. "Marcus, you're still young. You don't understand everything. Just trust me. Come home and we'll start over." Marcus remained silent, his eyes fixed on the last photo. In the corner was the logo of a famous newspaper, proving the person who gave Evelyn the photos was a journalist or someone from the media world. He stood up, his voice a whisper. "I'll think about it." Evelyn smiled. "Thank you." "And Marcus," she called. "Remember, they'll never be your real family." Marcus didn't respond. He left her directly. The door closed. Rain poured down cold and cutting. Evelyn pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Eric, Phase 2 begins today. They'll regret what they've done to me. Very soon." Outside, the rain intensified. Marcus stood under the awning, opening the envelope again. Rainwater blurred the ink, but the faces of Victor and Emma in the photo were still clear, unpretentious. Just the embrace of two people who'd suffered losses. Marcus clutched the photo in his hand, his tears mixing with the rain at that moment. He didn't know who to trust, the mother who raised him, or the man he barely knew but whose actions felt genuinely warm. Marcus bowed his head, clenching his fists, then headed directly to Victor's house. The atmosphere at Victor's house was heavy as everyone sat at the table. The meal passed in such silence that only the slight clinking of forks on plates could be heard. Marcus sat across from Victor, head down, stirring his water glass without drinking. Elizabeth noticed, gently setting down her fork. "What's wrong, Marcus?" He looked up, his voice trembling. "Is it true that he," pointing at Victor, "is using Emma to take over the company?" Emma's spoon clattered on the table. She looked at him, stunned. "What are you saying?" Marcus gritted his teeth, pulling the wet photo from his pocket and placing it on the table. "My mother said he only wants public sympathy. This photo is real, isn't it?" Victor looked at the photo, then at Marcus. He immediately understood Evelyn's scheme. But instead of getting angry, he simply nodded slightly, his voice calm but possessing strange depth. "Yes, it's real. But it doesn't mean what you think it means." He stood up, approached and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "If you want to know the truth, come to the hospital with me tomorrow. There you'll see what Evelyn fears most." Marcus didn't respond. He only looked at the photo, his eyes struggling between belief and doubt. But finally, he nodded slightly. The next morning, they left the house early. No one spoke much. The car stopped at an old hospital on the outskirts, where Richard had been rushed before his death. The facility had been closed for a long time, leaving only long, dusty corridors and dim light filtering through stained window glass. Elizabeth led the way, walking directly to the records room. She presented her attorney's badge, her voice severe. "I represent the closest legal relatives of Mr. Richard Morgan. I request all documents related to the night of August 17th last year." The elderly nurse leaned toward a metal filing cabinet, rummaging for a moment before pulling out a mocha folder. "This is all that's left." Elizabeth flipped through it, squinting when she saw the name of the doctor who signed the death confirmation. "Dr. Henry Caldwell," she murmured. "Caldwell used to be a certifying physician for Evelyn's insurance company." Victor nodded subtly. Too much coincidence to be random. Grace, who was still accompanying the group, stood near the door. Victor remained silent, then suddenly spoke. "Now I remember. That night, Mr. Richard came home very late. He said if he didn't wake up the next morning, I should give this envelope to you, Victor." She paused, her voice faltering. But early the next morning, Evelyn arrived first. She said Mr. Richard had died and snatched the envelope away. I didn't have time to do anything. Silence descended over the room. Emma clutched Grace's hand, her eyes teary. Elizabeth continued her examination. She opened a metal drawer in the corner, finding a plastic box containing some old empty vials. Syringes, a notebook. In a yellowed vial. The label clearly said, Epicardia 500, import lot, Sterling Chemicals Inc. Elizabeth startled. "This can't be. This substance is only used for trials not in the approved catalog. And Sterling Chemicals." She looked at Victor. "That company was once partially invested in by Evelyn." Emma leaned in, picking up the empty vial, placing it in her palm. "Then, my father was taken out?" Victor didn't respond. He simply placed a gentle hand on the girl's head. His gaze deep. Elizabeth quickly took photos of all the evidence with her phone. "We need to leave here immediately, before anyone realizes we're..." But as they prepared to enter the hallway, two figures appeared at the end of the corridor. A familiar voice echoed, "I'm afraid you're a bit late." Two men in black suits approached with small earpieces. The Martin security logo was printed on their chests. Marcus reacted first, pushing Emma back. "It's my mother's people." "Then we can't convince them to let us out," Victor said softly. Then pushed a utility cart directly at them. The cart spun into the hallway, hitting one man and making him stagger. Elizabeth grabbed Emma and ran. Grace shouted, "The emergency exit is that way." The chase erupted. Footsteps echoed against the old concrete walls. Victor and Marcus used chairs, desks, and trash cans to block the path, but the two men closed in. One man raised a stun device. A flash of light grazed Marcus's shoulder, making him fall to his knees. Victor turned around, striking the man hard in the stomach, then grabbing the stun device and firing back. The man fell, convulsing. Elizabeth helped Emma run toward the front door. There, police sirens sounded urgently. Grace appeared, still holding her phone. "I called them as soon as we were in the car." The two attackers were immobilized. One man nervously dropped his wallet, revealing an employee card from Martin Security. Elizabeth picked it up, holding it up for the police. "Direct proof. They work for Evelyn Hartwell." The police immediately took statements. Marcus was treated for his wound while Emma sat holding the vial in her hand, her eyes vacant. Victor approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did well. We have everything we need. Now it's time to bring the truth to light." That afternoon, they were at the Central Police Station. Evelyn was summoned for questioning. She entered with her usual impeccable demeanor, a muted black dress, hair neatly pulled back, bright red lipstick. The detective sat down, crossing her legs, looking at the detective with a calm gaze. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice uniform. "They're making things up out of jealousy and desire to take what I have." The detective opened the file, placing before her the copy of the toxicology report newly reanalyzed from the stored blood sample. "Mrs. Hartwell, a large amount of epicardia 500 was found in Mr. Richard Morgan's system, a substance that causes cardiac arrest in 5 minutes if overdosed." Evelyn flinched, but only for a fraction of a second. "A man with a heart condition who died from cardiac arrest. What's unusual about that?" "This is," Victor intervened. He entered the room, placing the photo of the vial on the table. "Because this type of substance was only found in your company's inventory." Evelyn's gaze suddenly changed. She knew she was against the wall. "Everything is just a coincidence." She spat, her voice beginning to lose composure. "Richard. He betrayed me first. He planned to transfer all the shares to that little girl, leaving me with nothing." The phrase exploded like a knife. Instantly, the air in the room froze. Elizabeth stared at her, her voice sharp as steel. "So you silenced him?" Evelyn clenched her hands tightly without saying anything. That silence was enough. Confirmation. After the police left, Victor sat alone in the office. He didn't speak, only observed the light coming through the window. Reflecting on the old desk, outside, Emma approached, holding the partially repaired music box. "I think my father won't be sad anymore," the girl said. Placing the music box on the table. Victor smiled slightly, turning the crank. The previously distorted melody now sounded clearer, still not perfect, but warm. "My father once said," Emma whispered, "in the end, music always wins over noise." Elizabeth stood by the door, silently observing the scene. At that moment, they knew the long journey of fear, deceit, and loss was finally coming to an end. But before justice could be fully served, a final battle awaited. At Morgan Enterprises headquarters. The secretary placed a brown envelope on Evelyn's desk. "Summons from the Supreme Court." Evelyn opened the envelope, read it quickly, then scoffed. She stood up, walking toward the large mirror in her office. The mirror reflected her face, beautiful, tired, and distorted in the yellow light. She raised her hand and broke it. Blood seeped from the glass fragments, running down her wrist. She looked at herself through hundreds of fragments, her voice hoarse. "If they want a battle, I'll sink them all with me." The glass pieces fell to the floor, shattering like the final secrets that couldn't be hidden. A year had passed since that last rainy night. But the city had changed. And with it, the people once suffocated by the past had learned to live again. This morning, the central courthouse was packed. The trial for Evelyn Hartwell's Casewell forgery and complicity in accidental death was public. Reporters crowded the entrance. Numerous lenses pointing at the woman once hailed as the city's most perfect businesswoman. Evelyn appeared between two escort officers. She wore a subdued crimson dress, heavy makeup to hide her dark circles. But her lips still curved in a slight smile. Amid the flashes, she maintained her posture, walking slowly, as if this were just another performance. On the opposite side, Elizabeth, in a navy blue suit, placed each folder on the table before the judge. Victor didn't speak much, letting the evidence speak. The hospital video, the toxicology report, signature comparison charts, and testimonies from Marcus and Grace. Victor sat behind, silently observing. Each time he looked at Evelyn, he no longer felt hatred, only regret for someone who could have chosen the right path. In the back audience rows, Emma sat between Marcus and Grace. In her hands was the fully repaired music box. Each gentle turn of the crank produced a small, soft melody like her father's advice from long ago. Elizabeth leaned in and whispered, "It's almost over, Emma. From now on you won't have to fear anyone." The girl nodded slightly, her eyes bright and clear, completely different from the trembling girl of a year ago. When the judge stood up, the room fell into absolute silence. "Mrs. Hartwell," the judge's voice was clear, leaving no room for argument. "Based on confirmed evidence, the court declares you guilty of document manipulation and as an accomplice in the tragic event of Mr. Richard Morgan. The sentence, 15 years in prison." The sound in the room exploded. Camera flashes fired. Whispers surged like waves. Evelyn didn't look at the judge. She turned toward Marcus, her eyes mixing resentment and regret. Marcus briefly bowed his head. Tears fell on his hands. He no longer felt anger, only emptiness. The mother who once protected him was now leaving in shackles. And he understood that bitterness never rescued anyone. Evelyn passed by the row of seats. Her eyes briefly met Emma's. The girl didn't flinch. Their gazes met for a brief moment. A girl who had forgiven, and a woman who finally knew she'd lost everything. Weeks later, Victor organized a small concert at the Starlight Garden Center, a place he, Elizabeth, and Marcus helped establish to assist children with different abilities through music therapy and recovery. The concert hall was simple, bathed in warm yellow light. On the wall hung a smiling photograph of Richard, the rustic wooden frame placed next to a vase of white lily. Emma, in a new white dress, walked slowly to the stage. Her shining prosthetic legs reflected the light. But she walked more firmly than ever. The murmur diminished. Then silence. When the familiar melody began, the girl started to sing clear, pure, and peaceful. When the stars fall asleep, I'll watch over your dreams. No one in the audience breathed deeply. Each note fell like a small star, illuminating hearts that had suffered losses. Victor gently closed his eyes. Elizabeth placed a hand on her chest, and Marcus sat quietly in the front row, a slight smile on his lips. When the song ended, the applause was endless. Grace cried as Emma bowed. The girl's voice was small but resonated in the microphone. "I sing for my father, for my mother, and for those who chose light over shadow." The audience erupted in emotion. A girl with a disability stood in the center of the stage, no longer afraid, only convinced that kindness and music could heal everything. Victor stepped forward, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. "You would have made your father so proud," he said, his voice laden with emotion. Emma smiled, looking around her friends, her teachers, the people who rescued her from a living hell. Now they were her true family. As everyone left the hall, Victor stepped onto the porch. Taking a deep breath in the night sky, a streak of light crossed, a solitary shooting star, rushed toward the horizon. He whispered softly, as if speaking to someone far away, "Richard, did you see that?" "Your little one sang." And she flourished. From inside, Emma's laughter rang out, mixing with the sound of the open music box. And that peaceful, pure sound dissolved into the air like the final farewell to a long night that had ended. And there, among the people who had once fallen, The small light of a star continued to resonate, and that's our story. A journey that began with tears but ended with the light of courage and forgiveness. What do you think? Which character moved you most? Was it Emma, the small but resilient girl? Victor, who kept his promise to his late friend? Or Marcus, the boy who dared to confront his own mother to do what's right? What moment impacted you most? When Emma stood to sing before the crowd? When justice was served in court? Or when the final melody rang out at Starlight Garden? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's talk about the beautiful things this story brought about: faith, forgiveness, and how light always finds a way to shine through darkness. Because in the end, the stars always guide us home.